Now, before I start this week's show, I'd just like to say a quick thank you to our podcast sponsor, Fidelity International. Now, Fidelity are one of the best-known investment platforms out there, and they're also a global fund manager responsible for around £320 billion worth of investments for over 2 million clients globally. Now, I personally use Fidelity's investment platform to run my own 80/20 investment portfolio, and that's for a couple of reasons. A, because they're cost-effective, and B, because they have access to ETFs, investment trusts, and unit trusts. For those of you out there who are looking for ideas of where to invest your ISA allowance this season, then Fidelity offer a range of guidance and fund shortlists, and they also offer fund suggestions from their investment director Tom Stevenson, whose name you may recognise because he also writes for The Telegraph. Now, you can find out more information about Fidelity and all of those fund shortlists at fidelity.co.uk. But for now, on with this week's show.
Hello and welcome to episode 210 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leeks. Damien, welcome back. How are we doing? We're in the office, we're together, we're loving it.
That's what I was just about to say. This is a monumental episode because it's the first time we've done it together in the office and as colleagues, Andy. So this is it going forward. So you may hear the odd noise, but it's because we do it in the office now. So almost right on cue there, I think there's one in the background. So it's really exciting. So we normally always talk about how was your week, Andy? How was your week, Damien? We're going to still do that largely going forward because you guys like to know bits and pieces we've been up to. But I obviously know what you've been up to this week, Andy. But how has your week been at your new job?
Yeah, well, it's a weird one, isn't it? So so I can tell you, Dave, I've had an interesting week. I started a new job, and my employer's okay, treating me well. Took me out for lunch the other day. That was really nice. I've really genuinely loved it. I mean, we won't sort of interviews and go too much into it. And over the weeks, people will hear what's going on and what I'm up to, what you're up to, and together what we're achieving. But I genuinely, absolutely loving it. And I think the listeners are going to appreciate and benefit from both of us working together, because I think there'll be more insight and better quality work, actually, because I'm not having to do it in my spare time. I'm doing it for my day job.
Yeah, and we'll be able to push out more. So watch Instagram, go on social media. We're really ramping that up. And I know a lot of you have been in touch with Lauren in the background. She's doing a lot of that stuff for us. And Instagram will show you a lot of what's going on in and around the office, like Andy said about lunch or things we're getting up to, but there's content on there as well. So just to give you an example, the Friday quiz is still on Instagram every week now. It's going to be a regular feature, so have a look at that if you haven't already. They are saved down as highlights if you want to have a look at what the quiz is. We gave away mugs this week and announced the winners, which was fantastic. And of course, there were highlights of me going to Tottenham Hotspur, which was one of my highlights. Although I've got a season ticket, I actually went in a box at Tottenham. I was just in +1 on basically a competition win. I just went along for the free ride. And if you'd watched social media, you would have seen an absolutely incredible magic trick that was performed on the people in the box. But go and have a look at Instagram if it's not dropped off the feed already. So other than that, one thing I've got to mention, MOT. You're going to be so excited about MOT. We are just about, by the time you've listened to this, it's probably going to have launched. And so it's definitely launching next week. Again, we've been eyeing out a few things. So I know a number of you have been Googling Damien's Money MOT. And now there's a tip. If you Google Damien's Money MOT, you will find it. And you can go and do it. And so feel free, go do it. Let me know what you think. We're going to probably do more on the MOT next week to explain more when it's out and about and explain what it does. But in the meantime, feel free to go and have a bit of a preview.
Good. So what have we got coming up on this week's pod? What are we covering?
Right. We're going back. I want to just touch upon something I talked about last week, pensions, but leading on from that. And it's really, last week I talked about how to take money from a pension in a way that was efficient from a tax perspective. But I want to touch upon a way that is sustainable. It's a very different thing. So how can you not run out of money? I want to touch upon a rule that has became it became a bit of a conventional wisdom, one that was used as a go-to for how to have a sustainable income in retirement, but that's now been debunked. I want to talk about travelling, so air travel, so people, a sneaky way to get airfare cheaper that is being challenged in the courts. So if you are somebody who likes to get a cheap airfare or cheap flight, you want to listen to that. And finally, a bit of fun. I'm not going to do any investing this week. I think we've all done a lot of investing stuff. So I want to do a piece on the reasons, or almost the ridiculous and crazy reasons why insurers won't pay out on your insurance policies.
Good. So we're going to start with income tax on pensions.
Yeah, on the income tax on pensions, that's just jumping back to last week, because I gave an example and said that if you withdraw ad hoc amounts, you can have a nice combination of tax-free cash and income to make it more tax efficient if you were going to try and spread it over time. And I thought I'd just throw some numbers in there quickly just to make that make a bit more sense, because I did say it very quickly at the end of the podcast. Now, if you were going to take ad hoc amounts from your pension, I hate the term using it like a cash machine, but if you're going to take mini lump sums, then you could actually, rather than take it as tax-free cash, you could take it as a quarter as tax-free cash, and then the rest of that lump sum, i.e. 3/4 of it, would actually be taxable. So the lump sum comes out, you could have it so a quarter's tax-free and 3/4 is taxable. That is the rule. But what that means is if you're very cunning, and let's say you took a lump sum of £15,800, then a quarter of that is tax-free, so that's £3,950, but the taxable amount is exactly £11,850, and that matches your annual income tax allowance. If you had no other income, then all of that £15,800 you took from your pension that tax year would actually be tax-free. There wouldn't be any tax liable. So that was what I wanted to mention. But jumping onto the sustainability. Now, the idea is if you had decided you're retiring, you're taking your pension, you may have taken out some money to build a conservatory or pay off some debts. You're then left at the point where you're thinking, well, how can I use this pot to provide an income into retirement? And the biggest problem you've got when you combine pension freedoms, which, as we know, allows you to pretty much take your cash as you want from your pension, and defined contribution schemes, that's where the pension freedoms really work well, it kind of does feel a bit like a cash machine. So you need to get a strategy to ensure that that pot is going to be sustainable, because if you keep taking big chunks out, what you'll find is you'll run out of money probably fairly quickly. So the question is, what is a sustainable level of income to take a year? Now, there are lots of factors you'd have to put into that equation. So the size of your pension pot, how much income you would obviously want, how long you're likely to live, future investment returns, and of course inflation. But there are a number of those factors you've not got a clue about. You don't know how long you're going to live, you don't know what inflation is going to be, and you certainly don't know how much money you're going to make in the types of investments you might choose. Because don't forget, you can leave the money that's going to provide the income invested, i.e. in the stock market or whatever investments you choose. So what happened is about 20 years ago, over in America, they came up with this rule, and it's called the 4% rule. And it's a rule whereby if you invest a portfolio, 50% shares and 50% in, say, US Treasuries, that was because it was built in America, that was the basis of the model. So in the UK, 50% in UK shares, 50% in things like gilts, which are the UK equivalent of treasuries. Then the study suggested over a 30-year period, if you just drew 4% of your pot every year as an income, it would be sustainable, i.e. you wouldn't run out of money in that 30-year period. And that income would actually increase with inflation, because don't forget, if you're going to start withdrawing money from anywhere, if it's a pension or investments, if you do over a long period of time, inflation, the cost of things you buy in shops or anywhere, that starts to rise. So the £1 in your pocket is worth less tomorrow than it was today if inflation keeps going up, and that's the general trend, that inflation will rise. So a couple of years ago, Aegon debunked that 4% rule, and they looked at it and they said, actually, if you look at that study again, and they reran some numbers and made their own view of it, changed the sort of mix slightly to, like, say, 60-40%, 60% shares, 40% in fixed interest, they actually worked out that in that 30-year period that a 65-year-old who tried to do that would have a 1 in 5 chance of running out of money. So they would actually get to the point in their old age, assuming they lived that long, that they actually would have nothing, they have no money in that pot. Now, that then leads me full circle onto, well, what is a sustainable rate? Well, they crunched some numbers on that as well. So when they looked at that, they took into account various different aspects, like I said before, life expectancy, returns, portfolio makeup, and they worked out that the most sustainable rate of withdrawal from a pension pot would be between 1.7% a year and 3.6% a year. Now, why is there a difference? It depends on your attitude to risk, so how much risk you want to take. But you can see that's quite a bit different from 4%. And in fact, there was a subsequent bit of work that showed that if you wanted to be 99% certain that you wouldn't run out of money in your retirement, then you would have to have a withdrawal rate of only 1.8% a year. So you take that number, let's just call it 2%. If you want to work backwards and you sit there and say, look, I want to try and provide an income for my pension of £20,000, then you can see you've got to multiply that number by around about 50. I'm ignoring growth and all those elements. I'm just doing basic numbers so you can sort of in your head. Well, you do that by 50, you can suddenly see you're getting to like £1 million. So that shows you the level of money you need in your pot. Of course, there are other factors. You can have investment growth. You can be more tax efficient with the withdrawals that you take out, as I explained last week. So it's just a rough guide. So you might want to seek advice to try and work out the best way to take that money. But it just goes to show that the conventional wisdoms do date, and sometimes they do need to be reviewed.
It's quite scary stuff, really. There's big old differences there. 4.1%, and now we're saying, actually, let's revise that. Let's say 2%. It's a massive difference.
But then you could take this idea of what we're just talking about and flip it the other way around, like I did at the end, and said it shows you how much you have to have in a pension pot. So I'm talking about a defined contribution pot. But then it can go on and say, well, yeah, if you've got a final salary pension, if you're one of the lucky people out there that your employer gives you a final salary pension and you know what that will be because it's based upon your salary at retirement, you can see how big that fund and how big a liability that is to be able to provide you with that income throughout your retirement. So therefore, that's why when you sometimes go and people see these transfer values from defined benefit schemes into a normal pension, like a defined contribution scheme, they're massive numbers and they get all excited. Yeah, because if you take that money, it needs to be big enough so you don't run out of it, run out of an income in retirement. And the chances are, if you take it, unless it's managed properly, you probably will run out of money in retirement. Anyway, that's a sobering thought. Before we move on, Andy, I just wanted to quickly mention 80/20 Investor. Now, 80/20 Investor is my DIY investment service. Do go and check it out. I empower and teach people how to invest their own money. The service provides data-driven fund tables. The data is driven by my own unique 80/20 Investor algorithm, which I created. You also get stop-loss alerts, you get research articles and insights, you get market commentaries, monthly commentaries, and DIY investment lessons, but you also get access to my £50,000 portfolio, which is a portfolio of my own money, which I run live on the site for members to see, and it shows people how I use the service to maximise my returns. And in the first 2 years of doing so, I turned £50,000 into £59,500, which is a 19% return, beating investment managers, professional fund managers, financial advisors, investment banks, passive trackers, and the market. So everybody can have a free 30-day trial of 80/20 Investor, and you can claim that by going to moneytothemasses.com and going and clicking on the 80/20 Investor hyperlink at the top of the page. So go and try the service. Let me know what you think of it, and I know from the feedback that you're going to love it. But for now, on with the show.
Okay, so it's that time of year. Everyone's sort of getting fed up with the cold and searching for flights. In fact, I've recently searched and bought some flights myself, Damien. You mentioned earlier that there's a little bit of a weird thing going on that the airlines aren't too happy about.
Yeah, so I had never heard of the term skiplagging, okay? So it's all new to me, but there is a way that you can get a cheaper flight by adding an additional stop to your trip. So let's imagine you wanted to take a journey from Seattle to Frankfurt, okay? And the airline would charge you a premium for that flight because it's a direct flight, okay? Is that fair? I don't know, but that's the realities of the world. In a rather bizarre twist of pricing, if you booked a flight between Seattle and Oslo, where there was a stop, an interchange, a connection in Frankfurt, the whole trip from Seattle to Oslo would be cheaper than if you went direct from Seattle to Frankfurt. And the reason you're probably thinking, why has he picked these 2 random or 3 random places? And the reason is because this was at the centre of a court case. Because there was a guy who did that, and he actually only wanted to go to Frankfurt. So rather than go direct to Frankfurt on one plane, on one ticket, he worked out that he could get it cheaper if he went to Oslo but had a stop at Frankfurt. When he got to Frankfurt, he walked out the airport and didn't go on the subsequent flight.
He slung his coat over his shoulder, chucked his ticket in the bin and walked out.
That's exactly what he did. And so by not taking that second leg of his trip, then he'd actually saved a lot of money. Now, this is called skiplagging. And it happened a few years ago, this case. People do it all the time. In fact, there's a website called skiplagged.com that will actually detail these flights if you want to go places and help you to do it. And the reason why this suddenly came up in the news is because the airlines are pretty annoyed about it, because you're manipulating their pricing structure. Me personally, I think that should be fair game. They should actually offer a pricing structure that actually works for everybody. It's a bit like this multi-ticketing on trains, isn't it? Split ticketing, all these sorts of things. It's overly confusing and somewhat needless.
Even my train here today was cheaper by buying a single here and a single back than it was to buy a return, which should never really be the case. It should always be quicker and cheaper to buy.
See, that's
to buy
bonkers, because on trains I always think it's a case of they just chuck on £1 onto your fare and go, oh, you get a return.
No, it's actually cheaper to buy two singles. I've got them here. You're looking at them now. Crazy.
That is unbelievable. So what happened, the airline was Lufthansa, and so they took him to court and wanted to get the money for the second ticket, basically. They were trying to say to him, you should have booked a direct flight. You didn't, so therefore you basically didn't pay the right fare, and they wanted the difference. They wanted to stop this happening and make an example. Well, the court case got thrown out, and this was back in December 2016. But recently, they've just been allowed to make an appeal against that court judgment. So we're going to see what happens with it. So what you need to do is, if you're going to do this, then if you look at the T's and C's on your ticket, it actually probably says you can't. So you may fall foul of any T's and C's on any flights you book. Now, tips on doing this style of flying and cheap flights is that there are people who've fallen foul of booking the same sort of combination of flights, but rather than actually making the journey they want to do the first leg of the trip, they've made it the second one. So what they've done is, rather than turn up, in that example, if the guy had turned up, say he wanted to really go to Oslo and he turned up at Frankfurt to get on the second leg of the flight to go to Oslo, what the airlines are doing is they're working out, hey, you didn't get on at Seattle to Frankfurt, so the first leg, because you didn't do it, they are saying, we're going to cancel the second leg. So people are going there, and then their second leg is actually being cancelled and they haven't got a flight. So if you're going to do something like this, then make sure that the first part of the trip is the one you're actually going to do. And the other thing is, they're being shrewd, the airlines. What they're doing is they're actually taking your luggage and sending it on to your final destination to try and say, right, okay, you're not so smart now. You've walked out the airport at Frankfurt because your luggage is in Oslo. And so in a true game of cat and mouse between airlines and consumers, the sorts of people who will be doing this won't take luggage anyway. They'll just take hand luggage on the plane, so they can still, as Andy described, sling the jacket over the shoulder and just stride out into the sunset at their chosen destination. So it does exist. I'm not saying necessarily do it, but if you do, there are ways you can do it, but you've got to be aware, because the airlines are getting slightly shrewder about it.
Excellent. What have we got next?
Right. The last one, the world of insurance, Andy. You like a bit of insurance?
Well, I mean, you say that, but no, I do. I find it interesting. What have we got?
Right. It's the crazy ways or reasons why insurers won't pay out on insurances. And some of them are existing T's and C's in policies. Some are just things that they've rejected in the past. Now, one of them, which seems the most bizarre exclusion on a policy, is nuclear disaster. So there are policies out there, and this came from the Times, by the way. The Times did a piece on this, so I'll give them credit. A lot of it was actually rubbish, but there was bits of it that I found quite funny, so that's why we're doing it. Because
you take with one and you give with the other.
Yeah, exactly. Because there seemed to be one insurer that got an absolute caning, and it was Ensley, and nearly all the examples they had were from that insurer, probably from some real legacy policy. But Ensley was, in this case, the insurer who doesn't like nuclear disasters. So if there's a nuclear accident and your house is wiped out, which is probably going to be your biggest issue rather than the fact that you aren't going to be able to replace it, or you get some damage from leaked radiation. They're saying they won't pay. Now, my view is in a nuclear incident, I'd be fearing far more for my life than I would do for my house.
Yeah.
Because even if they rebuilt it, presumably I'm going to be living in a radioactive zone. So, nuclear disaster. Now, this tickled me, the next one. Planking and owling. Do you know what they are, Andy? These are internet phenomenons.
I've got an idea of what planking is, but I've no idea what owling. So planking is where you basically try and stay stiff as a board, horizontal between two objects, and generally you have a photo taken, and it's social media sort of friendly.
So you do that often?
No, I don't. But I do see people doing it. Actually, I tell you what I've seen.
You've seen somebody plank?
I've seen videos of people failing at it. You know, it's one of those.
Right.
It's very shareable on social media.
Yeah.
I take it that is planking, right?
That is planking. You've hit the nail on the head. So planking, as Andy very well described there, is in some cases excluded from insurance policies, because if you kill yourself while planking, and as Andy said, from failed planking, then they might not pay out. And there are insurances out there that exclude it. So if you are into planking, then firstly, share a video with us on social media.
Oh yeah, do that.
Do that. But secondly, check your insurance policies. But then this leads us on to the next realm. I mean, I didn't know what owling is. So it's in the bird, but owling. And now we do like social media now.
Do you know, we're going to sound like dinosaurs here. There's going to be people shouting at their podcast going, what are these guys going on
look,
about?
these two.
Of course they don't know what owling is.
But I'm going to stick up for us here, because Lauren, who does a lot of this stuff, and Lauren is, I don't like the word millennial, but she's in her early 20s. So if anybody knows what these things are, she would be the person. And I said to her, do you know what owling is? And do you know what owling is, Andy?
I've no idea.
Apparently there was a craze where you will go and perch on things like an owl, in sort of tuck yourself away in sort of nooks and crannies on stairwells and banisters and all sorts of perches on buildings.
Just stay still.
And try and resemble an owl. Well, of course, that is...
To what end? What's the purpose?
You can't see Andy's face when you ask me that. He's almost in shock and disbelief, but a slight irritation. What are these people doing? I don't know. But there are obviously people who have died in the act of owling. And it feels like the Darwin Awards. If anyone doesn't know what the Darwin Awards, Google the Darwin Awards. It's basically something which goes around on the internet about people who've died in ridiculous ways. And the idea is it's meant to remove their genes from the gene pool for the better of humanity. And there are some crazy things. A man who once strapped a car engine to the back of his... a rocket engine to the back of his car, and obviously hit a cliff. Owling is excluded from a number of policies. You can't do it. If you have any accidents due to owling, that's out.
I think that's fair game on the insurer's part, to be honest, if you're stupid enough to do it. Anyway,
this one is more of a legacy. Concord clause.
Right.
So damage, I mean, bearing in mind, we are talking about the long-nosed plane...
supersonic jetliner that got...
Decommissioned
15 years ago.
I think it was in 2003. And apparently there is an exclusion on a particular policy for any damage caused by a Concorde. And we're talking about supersonic pressure waves. It's not just exclusive to Concorde.
I see, right.
So
okay,
if you do the flyby, like you're in Top Gun, and it come past and they blow your windows out, then you're not going to get your insurance payout. And I thought that was quite incredible. Anyway, boring, this has gotten off a tangent. But I went on Concorde, not to fly, but just to see Concorde, because somebody I knew worked in the airport. And we went on it. It's tiny. And so some listeners might be wealthy enough to have gone on one. But there was a slight gap between where the cockpit is and where the rest of the plane is, because where it flew, the plane would slightly expand. And you would close a little gap up. There you go. You've learnt something, not money today. There are still exclusions around some really archaic things that have been around, things to do with the Millennium Bug, if anyone remembers that, still around. And there is even some insurers that have really, really archaic ideas about things to do with HIV and home insurance and not paying out, with things related to HIV. So that is, I don't know how that has come about, quite frankly. Maybe that's just a legacy of being frightened about something they didn't know much about. Attempted suicide is one. So almost killing yourself is, of course, exclusion. And presumably you'd still be alive on a life insurance policy. I don't think they'd pay out anyway. So attempted suicide, triathlon. Now, if you go on holiday and you've got holiday insurance and you are the sort of person who gets up in the morning and cracks out a triathlon, then not only do you need to have a word with yourself, but you probably need to take out a separate policy, because there are a number of policies that won't cover people who do bizarre activities on holiday, and triathlon is one of them.
Wow.
Have you ever felt the urge?
No, funnily enough, no. Never felt the urge to do a triathlon on holiday, or a triathlon at any other stage in my life, or ever in the future. Just touching on that attempted suicide thing, it is quite a key thing on a lot of life insurance policies at the moment. A lot of people do ask the question. Most decent insurers will cover suicide after the first year or so of the policy. So don't be. I know it's a morbid subject, but that is an interesting one.
Yeah, but it's important, because that's one of the ones that people think that isn't covered, but you are.
You genuinely are. You generally are for most insurers after a certain period of time. You need to check the
yeah, and the only reason it's that length of time, because obviously they don't want people taking insurance out and then deliberately planning to kill themselves. But it's obviously for people who develop depression and things like that. So that's a big tick in the industry actually for that. And one of the last one actually is a wolf hybrid. Have you ever heard of a wolf hybrid?
No.
A wolf hybrid.
Oh, is that the new one that Nissan have brought out?
No, the wolf hybrid is a dog, a type of dog. So there are people who have pets that are hybrids with wolves and things like that. So dangerous dogs. And some pet insurances won't cover them or won't pay out if they find out your dog is the result of a breeding between wolves and another breed. So
it's a strange one, that, but I suppose that's similar to sort of when people make modifications on cars and on car insurance, and certain modifications aren't covered because they can't guarantee that it's the real thing.
Yeah, so that is it this week, Andy. As I said, we got the MOT coming this week, so please do give us some feedback on that. Oh, and before we go, actually, we've had a review. Now, we haven't asked for reviews for a long time. We're doing a lot of stuff on social media. Please keep sending those bits in on social media and the reviews and etc. and things you like, because they're very shareable. But do also write a review on iTunes if you can. And we've just had one in this week, in fact, which Andy is going to read out.
Here we go. Great informative podcast. Really pleased that I've come across this podcast and the associated blog and website. I'm working my way through some of the previous episodes and so far learning lots. There's so much information about investing, and I'd highly recommend the tips for Parents podcast. Now, that was from Yuan Fine, so thank you for that. That was on February the 3rd.
So by the Parents podcast, he's talking about a previous episode that we'd done for Parents, which was actually probably a hell of a long time ago, but I love the fact he's going back through the back catalogue.
Good stuff. Thanks, Damien. So if you want to get in touch with Damien, you can do so. It's Damien@moneytothemasses.com, or of course on Twitter @moneytothemasses with a number 2. Instagram is really where it's at the moment. Get on there, log on, search for Money to the Masses. There's lots and lots to get involved with. You've got the Friday quiz, you've got competitions, and really just engaging and sending messages and details through to us. We love to hear from you.
And of course, Andy, they can get in touch with you. So if you want to get in touch with Andy, it's andy@moneytothemasses.com.
Yeah, send me an email through if you can, because Damien's not giving me enough work at the moment.
Actually, thank you for the people who did email Andy. We asked last week, would some people email Andy to make him feel wanted and loved? Not only did you email him, some of you sent him messages on Facebook and Instagram.
Yes, thank you for that. Sarah, I think, was one of the people that got in touch on email, and there's plenty of you on the social media stuff, so it's lovely to hear from you. Really genuinely looking forward to doing lots and lots more here at Money to the Masses, and you'll hear more in the coming weeks. Damien, until next week.
Until next week.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.